I'm Joshua, and I'm an INTP, and first and foremost, I would like to say thank you for viewing this video and subsequently visiting my channel. Now, this is going to strike people as strange because I just made a video on INFPs, but as I was preparing to make that video, there were a number of interesting things and ways that that video could go, and that's where I got in trouble in the early type video, as in my mind sometimes gets enraptured by the possibilities and taking a thing in 1,001 directions sometimes, as in it is something that I've gotten rather lazy in my thinking about doing. It's a habit I've gotten rather lazy in my thinking with, as in I will substitute infinite possibilities for accuracy of description, and I think that that's because I was fairly burnt out this school year and thinking, and I let possibilities substitute for logical connectivity and stringency, and that should never ever happen. But in this video, very really, it's just one of these interesting things that I thought that in the other video, in a way it could go. So this will be on INFPs and idealization. And so it's like this. That one way somebody can think about an INFP is that they're a squinty observer. So their eyes are squinted like this. Not literally, but this is the way that one could think about them in an environment. INFPs can't really see. They can kind of see, and they can make out the impressions to things, but they can't really see. What they do best is feel things, very really. They feel things, they feel objects. So the INFP can very really ascertain what's being communicated by the way something is impressed upon them. They know to move left, they know to move right, per se, by the impression of something. They also know how to make out an object from a sort of magnetic wave or field, as in objects pass through it and it reacts with the field, and its reaction, or really sonorific per se, things have to bounce off the object for its shape to be made manifest to the INFP. Very really. Now, I don't mean this as in literally they walk around as blind agents in the world, because they very really can have 20/20 vision, though a lot of them wear glasses. But at least the ones I know a lot of INFPs that don't wear glasses, but I know a whole heck of a lot that do. Anyways, it's just to say that this is the way that they orientate themselves in terms of their subjective experience. This is how their soul or the inner self is constituted, in whatever way they like to conceive that, about how it likes to go, how it has to go about, not necessarily how it likes to go about, but how it does necessarily innately go about perceiving the world and things that are going on in the world. Now, INFPs are concerned with meaning. So, they are hunting for these things, but very really, they are explorers. They can't help but to go out and see the world. They're looking for meaning in the world. And this is the interesting direction I thought that this could go. It's in their tendency towards communicative art forms, as in they tend to like poetry, they tend to like sculpture, they tend to like painting, they tend to like writing, they tend to like philosophy, they tend to like spirituality, they tend to like art, they tend to like the communicative, the perspective-seeking elements, and the exploration of the extension of perspectives. Now, one thing I did imagine, per se, as I was coming up with this thought experiment very really, is that an INFP has a fuzzy lens to them, as in they don't really see the world, they take in impressions. So the things that they're looking for, however, are rather amorphous and nascent, as in they're connected to the anthropomorphic structures or the archetypal agencies of human existence, as in their nodes of complexity but they do not necessarily have stringent delineated form to them, as in an archetype is an amalgamation of things. So when you press into an archetype, or you commune with it, or you take a piece of it off of it, as in a way, like if you think about it like an object, when you take a piece, a whole flood of things and a vat of things come out of it. Not one thing, because it's an idealization or an aggregation of many, many, many aspects in their completeness and totality to a certain kind of singularity of organizational patternization. Organizational patterns. It's hard to say, as in this, that if you were to think about the ideal cat, very really, it would have an aspect to it and a familiarity to it that every cat in existence has, by way of the largest genus of cat to the house cat, that the ideal cat would be the summation from the lion to the kitten. It's the collection of all these things in their fullest expression, as in they're all living yet brought together at one time. And this like really defies logic in a lot of sense, and my brain didn't really like this when I was thinking about it, but then I was like, you know what, in terms of how INFPs talk, this really works. Like, so go with it. And so this is typically what they're communing with, or what they're finding in their exploration. That's why they're concerned with idealization, as in they very much know that what they're after cannot be communicated, or it cannot be spoken of without distortion. You cannot say it without destroying what it is necessarily by saying it. I don't know I'm not going to say that's why extroverted thinking is their inferior function, but it's very interesting that this is a way that story or that narrative plays itself out, as in they're concerned with the things that have no names. Very really, they're concerned with the things that have no names and have no delineated patterns, but have all the meaning to them in the world, as in they're concerned with archetypes and just the things that don't come with stringent definition to them. They just can't be defined very well, as in love or freedom, or in any systematic rationale in terms of it being something that is definite and therefore manipulatable and or malleable, excessive, predictive, and reiterative, and they're not concerned with those things, and so they very really, what it seems like that they do is they go out and explore something, and they have these like little fuzzy things, and objects are passing in their little wave like amorphous aurora borealis thing of feelings, and they're getting their shapes and their forms. But sometimes what will happen with an INFP is something will get in there, but it's like it passes through, but it doesn't get a form. And the INFP finds this so dang interesting. They find it interesting. They say, what is that? They very much say, what is that? And they like, I don't know what it is. I think it reminds me of this thing, as they tend to be associative, or it's like this thing, but it's not quite like that. And once they find something pretty interesting, they want to codify it, as introverted sensing is a part of their complex, and it's their tendency. This is where idealization comes from in the INFP. And so they start dancing around the thing in some way. They really start dancing around the thing in some way, because the thing is not in the object itself. It's something that's connected to the numinous aspect of the archetypal expression. They, in some ways, get close to that object, and it makes some form, And because they have extroverted intuition, they tend to be concerned with the functionality of something, so they break it apart in some ways, very much like introverted thinking in some respects. And when they break it apart, they notice this node, something that does not change, and is in all of these other things that they're concerned with very really. So they're like, what is that? And they sit there and they ponder and they pontificate on that, and they start moving themselves to find that thing. They really start moving themselves in the environment to find that thing. They move themselves in their reading, in their expressions, in whatever it is, to try and communicate and talk with whatever this numinous thing is. And eventually they're going to get to some pen, pad, and paper, or some sculpture, some painting, something that's communicative, some music, something. And they're going to make some artwork. They're going to make some artwork. And they're making the artwork because, think about it like this. You can think about it like this. That if you can't really say something, how can you describe it? How can you describe something you can't say? How can you communicate what can't be told, per se? They do that by showing. It's the communicative art form is trying to show it. What they do is they plug themselves up into that thing, and then they try and, like Rain Man, just vat it out, just very really. They get possessed, per se, in the divine fury, or the sublime, and just try to vomit whatever it is. And you hear it very much in Milton, in the in his great poem Paradise Lost. There's been many moments in history, particularly by the romanticists, about divine fury being enraptured in the sublime, because that's really very much an aspect of the idealization, or the codification of an ideal, as in they do not systematize insofar as breaking down things, weighing them and evaluating them, looking at their true and false statements like I do, but what they start doing is kind of like fruit by the foot, fruit roll-ups, as in fruit by the foot. The fruit by the foot always has these interesting patterns to it, and you can't see the entire pattern unless you yank the thing out without eating it, because that's very hard for most kids to do. But sometimes you want to see the pattern, so what you do is extend the thing as far and as long as you can. It's why they like poetry, per se, as in there's the ambiguous forms there that are connected to this thing, and they can stack them on top of one another and keep pulling them down, or getting them out, getting these motifs and these expressions out, getting these metaphors out, because when you get them all out and their conglomeration, the expression of some form or some ideal, some piece of the archetype that's fallen off, per se, or not fallen off, but they've really captured in some way, as in that's kind of like their experimentation, where they can make a control and they select for this thing, and all they're trying to get out is this interesting piece of this archetypal expression that they noticed in all these other things, and in their communicative art forms, they're drawing out the archetype. It's like really exhaustive and almost like a seance in some ways, and why they're kind of attracted to those things, as they're bringing something forth. They're very much bringing something forth, and that's the ideal. And the ideal comes from, the ideal is birthed, per se, by a bleeding or an expression or a vomitization or an enrapturement or something with the INFP, per se, and their exploration. But it's because, how could you say something that can't be said? That's a conundrum, isn't it? They're very clever in solving it, to where it's like ideographs like freedom and those things like that. People are really amazed at my ability to come up with definitions for things. Even things that seemingly don't have definitions to them, I can come up with some really very good definitions to things, and that's one of the talents I have in physics and mathematics that saves me a lot of times, into where if I get somewhere that's very novel, that I don't know about, I can make a parameter that makes it easier to play in that space. INFPs do that very really with their emotions and their communication of emotions. They use the emotive impressions to create parameters to really get at what something is, and they take all of those things and throw them at something to get something to emerge, which would be an ideal. And once that ideal has emerged, they prize it because they know it's the purest expression of something that they can find. As in, the existential properties to it are the most profound, and really they're snobs in some ways, as in it's the most pristine expression, as it's not tarnished and pure, as in they, so it's very interesting that so say they value something like faith, they'll value I'm pulling this from Kierkegaard, they'll value the story of Abraham, and not necessarily the clergy member or the individual who is best at the exegy of scripture per se, as in a vat of knowledge per se about the matters of God, but could not take and risk in their complete anger, confusion, sorrow, and torment, that they could not capitulate their desires and per se, or hold steadfast in the temptation that God presented Abraham in sacrificing Isaac. Though that story is very off-putting to a lot of people, and so far as they can't understand why somebody would include that in the Bible, like who the hell would want to kill their own kid? How deplorable that is. That's the irrational argument you hear from a lot of people in terms of what exists in the Bible. I find those to be strawmans in some ways, is that I don't agree with them, because there are some darker aspects towards things that are in the Bible and that people would find horrific. But very really, an INFP like Kierkegaard can find that very endearing, as it is the epitome, or at least a piece of the salient pockets of meaning that he's going to collect over time to construct the ideal of faith. What is faith, and how do I approximate and appropriate myself towards having faith? What does it look like? As in, how do I act it out? Because acting it out best says what it is to them, because you cannot say what it is. You can't name what can't be named. As in, God has no name. God is a title. Yahweh in some way is a title. It's not a name, as in it's not who he is. It's saying he who has no name. What cannot be mentioned. As in, I've said in other videos before that I think very really that extroverted thinking and introverted feeling are the expression of the Godhead, or is the archetypal, the Godhead is the archetypal expression of this axis. But it's very really this interesting picture per se, and how it shows up in INFPs and their tendency towards idealization in communicative art forms. So that's another video per se, and I didn't include that in that video because these ideas are very much disparate and competing with one another in terms of the presentation of that video and what I said in this video, and it would have just been too contentious, so thus a second video, and hopefully you found that interesting.